100 years later, after Jonah preached to Nineveh and they surprisingly repented, I was also called to prophesy for Yahweh, the Most High God. My name, Nahum, means comfort. I was called to prophesy for the comfort of God's followers in Judah. Yes, it is true. Sometimes the Lord gives words for our comfort. He lets us know that we can be assured that He is in control. I was from a village in the Galilee. I believe you are familiar with Capernaum, which means the village of Nahum. Jesus spent a lot of time there. During the 100 years between Jonah's prophecy and my own, much had happened to Israel and Judah. Jonah gave his warning to Nineveh in 760 BC to repent, and they did. Remember, he was a prophet to King Jeroboam II in Israel, in the northern kingdom. In 722 BC, just about 40 years later, the entire northern kingdom of Israel fell to the Assyrians, the Ninevites, at the hand of King Sargon II. The capital city of Samaria was besieged and completely overtaken. The people were taken into captivity and dispersed into many different areas throughout the empire. That is, the ones that survived the Assyrian takeover. They brought foreigners from remote parts of the empire to live in Israel. Israel as a nation was no more. Judah was still hanging on in the south, right about the time King Hezekiah was king in the south. 8 years after the fall of Israel in the north, Sennacherib began a military campaign against Judah. Isaiah prophesies in chapter 8 that the Assyrians would overflow the country of Judah up to its very neck. The Assyrians did take all the fortified cities of Judah, including Lachish, but they could not take Jerusalem. King Hezekiah and Isaiah interceded for the city, and the city was spared. This is not my story to tell, but it is one of the most fascinating accounts of God's intervention in the entire scriptures. You can read it in the book of Isaiah, chapter 37 and 38. During the reign of Hezekiah's son Manasseh, now 50 years later, the kingdom of Judah was in the darkest period of its history. Manasseh was a wicked king. He was paying tribute to Assyria. The remnants of the followers of Yahweh were in hiding. The temple was filled with altars of false gods, and the king himself worshipped the host of heaven. He allowed his sons to be sacrificed in the fire of God of Molech. Manasseh seduced the people to do more evil than all the nations the Lord had destroyed before the people of Israel. It seemed all hope was lost. God wanted his people to know that his mercy for a season did not prevent their impending judgment. Judgment was coming. Yahweh called me as a prophet to bring comfort to the remnants of God's followers in Judah in 660 BC during the reign of Manasseh. They needed encouragement, my comforting message. I was to announce the fall of Nineveh and consequently the Assyrian Empire, and comfort the believing remnant in Judah with the assurance that Yahweh was in control. His judgment were about to arrive. Oh yes, I told the people, God is extremely angry with the Assyrians. He comforted the people of Judah by assuring them he would judge the wicked and also soothe them with these words. The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble, and he knoweth them that trust in him. Yes, God said he was going to make an utter end of Nineveh. They would no longer be able to afflict Judah. Not only was I given this word for their comfort, but I was given the details of how it was going to be done. While the prophecy did not actually come true until 612 BC, which was 52 years after my words were given to Judah, my words comforted them until it did. In 625, 13 years before the actual fall of Nineveh and Assyria, Zephaniah again predicted the destruction of the capital of Nineveh during the time of King Josiah. Wait for it. God's words always come true. Here are some of the details of the fall of Nineveh that God revealed through me. Of course, I didn't know until later, but every one of them was fulfilled by the letter. You can read it in a historical text called Biblia Secca. or the history of Assyrians at A.T. Olmsted. Let's start out with the humorous ones. Number 1, I prophesied Nineveh would be devoured while the army was drunk. That's right, the Babylonians made an unexpected attack by night after they heard that the men were drunk. The city had already besieged for 3 years. Let me tell you something about this city. It was a walled fortress with 20 feet thick walls surrounding it with a circumference of 60 miles. It also had an inside wall that protected the city itself. The farmlands inside the outside walls were used to grow crops to feed the inhabitants. God had warned of a siege. He told them to be prepared. They would need to make extra bricks for new walls of defense. Number 2, another thing God said was that he would cut off the house of their gods and their carved and molded images. Now let's stop for a minute. Do you know that up until 1845, many historians believed that Nineveh was a mythical city? But in that year, the ruins of the city were uncovered right across the Tigris River from the modern-day Mosul in Iraq. Guess what they found? The ruins of the temple. There was evidence of charred wood and ashes on the site and a broken statue of Ishtar. Yes, God said the city would be overtaken and destroyed by fire and flood. He predicted the sight of chariots thundering into the city, flaming torches. In excavations, not only was the temple burned, but many of the buildings, including the palace. It was also predicted that fire would devour the bars of the gates. Number 3, God also warned that the city would be flooded, that the gates of the rivers would be opened. In the 3rd year of the siege, heavy rains flooded part of the city and broke down the walls. This allowed the Babylonians to attack. Number 4, in the 3rd chapter of my book, I warned of a great massacre of people. Woe to the bloody city. They were brutal culture. They lied. They stole. They were violent people who tortured their victims. They had many sorcerers. History recorded that on the plains nearby, 2 major battles were fought. It was so bloody that the color of the stream waters had changed color for a considerable distance. Number 5, there were many other predictions, all that came true. There would be plundering and pillaging. The royal heirs would try to escape. The officers would weaken and flee, and many others. But the most important one was their injury had no healing. The wound would be so severe they would be utterly destroyed. In the end, the destruction was final. Nineveh was never rebuilt. While comforting Judah, all of us prophets, including Jeremiah, who was in Jerusalem at the time, issued a strict warning. Don't get prideful. Don't gloat over your enemy's fall. Keep the feast. Perform your vows to me. So Nineveh and the entire Assyrian Empire were given a death blow by 612 BC. Although I know my words were a comfort to Judah at the time, well, Judah had their own problems. In 586 BC, only 26 years after Nineveh was destroyed, my colleague Jeremiah wept over the destruction of Jerusalem itself. So how can I comfort you in your day with my message? I want you to remember that God keeps his promises. He will not tolerate sin forever. He will judge those that are wicked, and he will remember to comfort you in the meantime with words from his prophets, written in his holy book. God did not give the details of Nineveh's fall only for the faithful in my day. He gave them to you. He wanted you to see every detail of what he said would happen would indeed come true. You can trust him. He also gives one small detail about the coming Antichrist in my book. Check it out. I believe the Antichrist is going to be of Assyrian descent. Yes, God is coming to judge the earth and us. In the meantime, wait patiently. Be faithful and keep his word. The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble, and he knows them that trust in him. Comfort each other with these words. Hang out in the stronghold of his presence and love. He has plans for you, plans for good and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope.